What is up, guys? Sorry I've been gone for a minute, but it's been a little bit crazy. Obviously it's a massive week, so I thought I'd jump on and chime in quickly. UFC 274 coming up, as well as EFC Fight Night 2. So a couple of things I wanted to go through. Just firstly, before that, we had the RMAF All Africa Championship this weekend. That was a great event, I thought. You know, it's always exciting when a big international federation like RMAF comes through. And to see Team South Africa put on a performance, you know, the athletes really stood out and put their hands up. I think South Africa walked away with about 17 medals in total, and obviously 5 of those golds, putting them as the leaderboard winners for that event. Obviously some massive performances in there, not only from South Africa. Angola was obviously always going to be dangerous, and Namibia, I think, which came and surprised everybody with some great talent. Yeah, so it was a great event. Nice to see the African countries all coming through and putting on big performances, and overall just a really good event. So congratulations to all those athletes, and the tournament staff and everybody involved. I think it was a great success, and it's reassuring after everything that's happened in MMA to see such a great caliber event. Obviously the EFC and the Performance Institute played its part in like really upping the caliber of the show, and a really good stream, and you know, a great venue. So overall just a really good event, and great to see MMA action from an amateur point of view really kicking off in the country again, and a high standard at that, and a big shout out especially to Team Namibia. I think they were the team that surprised everybody with some massive talent. It'll be great to see where they go to from here. So shout out to those guys. I know it's Souza Studio down in Namibia that's really carrying the flag there. Big shout out to those guys. Really enjoyed all of their fighters, to be honest, and most of the fights were of a really high standard. So yeah, and big shout out to our ladies, really repping hard. Kiara Fagan, Nicole van Wyk, Mariska, you know, really putting on good quality fights. Yeah, so congrats to you all, well done. Hope you're sleeping nicely with those gold medals. Obviously this weekend coming up is a big fight action, starting with EFC Fight Night 2. We've obviously got Zulu Boy back in action, which is a bit of a strange one, so I just want to pull this card up. Bit of a strange one, being billed as a bantamweight fight for the flyweight contendership, which is a little bit strange, but it is what it is. Still a decent fight. I think obviously it's one of those cards where the EFC is having to edge us on to the next fight night. Not the kind of card that's going to knock your socks off, but it's still a good one at that. Let me just pull this card up. Okay, so obviously Zulu Boy versus Souza, as I explained. This is a very intriguing matchup stylistically. I think we've seen the evolution of Zulu Boy. Souza came out, he had a great performance, but quite clearly can't make flyweight. He had problems against Biko. They had to change that to a catch weight, and he had problems in the cut early on, and credit to him and his team, they were pretty honest about not being able to make the weight early on, and gave the opposition as well as the organization enough time to make changes. So you know, it's interesting to note that if he wins this fight, and if he then becomes a number 1 flyweight contender, it's definitely going to be tricky for him to get down there, because he clearly can't make that weight. Whether he's having weight cut issues with the travel, or perhaps he can't actually make that weight at all. Waits to be seen. So a bit of an interesting one, a bit of a gamble here by the organization, I would say. But stylistically, I think it's a great matchup. You know, these are two guys that are really going to come forward. We saw Souza's ability on the feet against Biko, and his ability to take punishment as well, which is going to be very interesting. Obviously the key for him is going to be closing the distance into a kind of boxing range, and that's always a hard thing to do against Zulu Boy, and that's where it gets really interesting for me, how Souza is going to change levels, if that's what he wants to do, and how is he going to close the distance. What's going to be the easiest way for him to close the distance, the path of least resistance, is going to be interesting to see. Zulu Boy obviously very dangerous with the front kick as well as the back leg, and that's always where it gets a bit dicey when you're trying to close distance. You know, he's got a lot of tools. when you're trying to close distance, and he's got a lot of tools going forward to keep the distance that he wants as well. So that's going to be super intriguing. I would guess that Souza might have a power advantage, but that power advantage means he's going to have to get in to a close distance, kind of like a boxing range, where you can really affect that. We haven't seen too much of what Souza offers on the ground, but I think Zulu Boy at the moment, when you're planning a strategy to face him, becomes quite tricky these days, because it's not quite clear cut, just get him on the ground and submit him. We've seen him submit some really, really good jiu-jitsu guys, wrestling guys. So yeah, it's an interesting one, how you go about dealing with Zulu. But I think the key for Souza is obviously going to be to get into that boxing range as fast as possible and as often as possible, with eating as little damage as possible, and then trying to affect it from there. I think for Zulu, we know what he's going to do. I think we might see some vintage Zulu, maybe a bit of stuff up the middle, kicks to keep the distance, and every time Souza tries to close that, punish him, angle off, and then get back to work. That's what I would expect to see. But stylistically, I think this is a great fight. It doesn't make sense in terms of weight classes and where it's going, but that's one thing. But I think stylistically, I think we're going to get a good fight here, and that's really kind of holding weight on this card. We've got Bradley Swanepoel versus Tumisang Madiba, which is also an interesting matchup. Obviously, Tumisang, a veteran, and Bradley Swanepoel, the young up-and-comer, obviously with a lot of hype behind him and his family name. Obviously, a big win here for Swanepoel really, really puts the cat amongst the pigeons to see where he goes to from there. And Madiba, a little bit of back against the wall, really needs to get a win here. So a great matchup there as well. Van Wyk, who we saw, I think she won fight of the night in her first outing. I think it was against Kaylee Niedermeyer, against the newcomer Wanjiku. This is the one I'm really excited about. Gift Walker versus the return of Buddha MMA, Mr. Mudley. This one is going to be super, super interesting. Obviously, Gift is on the rise. We know what Buddha brings. We've seen him plying his trade overseas, which has been an interesting one for me. It's been very much like keeping long ranges, 1, 2, 3 combinations, and then actually adopting quite a resting heavy style at times, which is going to be super interesting to see against a guy like Gift Walker, who seems to be the younger generation, super well rounded. So super, super interesting matchup for me there. Again, in the flyweight division, a big win here for these guys also really catapults them up into that near title contention picture. So definitely one to keep your eyes on. And I think that's, for me, one of the standout fights on the card, one you really want to keep your eyes on. Then you got Nicholas Huende versus Barros, the Angolan. This was originally in the prelim, so I'm glad that they have been pushed up to the main card. I think this is a good fight, Nicholas Huende versus Barros. Nicholas Huende just seems like a wild man, finds incredible ways to finish fights. He seems super athletic, got a pretty good fight IQ. Obviously got a good team behind him, has a good strategy, knows what he wants to do, knows how to get it done. And against Barros, he looked really good obviously he's an Angolan kickboxer. He looked really good on his first outing, so it's going to be an interesting matchup, that one. And then the rest of the card, I'm not really going to go through too much. One to watch there, P.D. Coxon versus Wade Henderson, 2 old school guys going at it. But yeah, otherwise a reasonably good card. I know they build this as a fight night, and there's obviously a reason for it. No real titles on the line. There's kind of a lot of contenders to be made from here and that sort of thing, which we're not mad at. Just the main event obviously doesn't make too much sense in terms of weight divisions, but I think stylistically and as a matchup, it's a pretty darn good fight. Then obviously coming up after that will be UFC 274. This is a big pay-per-view. At the head of the card, Justin Gaethje returns for a second shot at the title. He'll be fighting Charles do Bronx Oliveira. Now, this card is obviously really, really stacked. It's so stacked to the point that I actually completely forgot that Michael Chandler was fighting Tony Ferguson on this card, as I'm sure most of you did. Just to touch on Gaethje versus Ferguson, this is obviously, Gaethje versus Oliveira. you know, this is one of those weird ones where we get caught out quite often by the hype of the fight as opposed to the details of the fight. Going through the build-ups and having a look at some of the previous fights, it's quite hard to see how this fight really turns out. Obviously, we know what's really going to unfold in our minds and on paper. Gaethje's going to do what Gaethje does. There's two styles of Gaethje. I think there's a Gaethje that fought Tony Ferguson, who's completely aggressive but completely controlled at the same time. And I think that has a lot to do with how Trevor Whitman keeps him in the fight during the fight. I think he plays a massive role there. Calms him down, step by step guides him through what to do next. You know, pull back here, accelerate there. Just two guys that know each other completely. And that's half of the beauty to watch a Justin Gaethje fight, is to watch the interactions between him and Trevor Whitman. So it's going to be interesting. I would guess that a more gauged approach, the more gauged Gaethje, would be the better chance of winning against Charles Oliveira. That Gaethje has a better chance as opposed to the complete wild man. I don't know how Gaethje beats Oliveira barring a knockout. I think that's the easiest way for him and probably the only way. I don't think he's going to submit him. I don't think he's going to outpoint him, possibly over 25 minutes. So I would say that Gaethje's got to find a knockout, and I think that's his style. And I think that's really what he's going to try and do. What we have seen from Charles Oliveira is take shots from Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, get hurt, survive and win. And I think that's been an interesting pattern developing. He gets hurt and he finds a way to come back and win. And I mean, that's the character of a true champion. The thing with Charles Oliveira is any sniff at an opportunity at the moment on the feet and on the ground, he doesn't miss those opportunities. You give him half an opportunity and he finishes the fight. This is a guy with obviously the most submissions in the UFC ever. No slouch on the ground, obviously, we know what he does there, but his technicality on the feet has just come on in leaps and bounds. So it's going to be an interesting battle on the feet. I think both guys will have the confidence to really come forward. I think Charles Oliveira will be very conscious of the power coming back and the wildness of Justin Gaethje matched with the power and technique. I mean, he is a technician at the end of the day. And I think Gaethje will be very conscious of not overextending and giving opportunities to get the fight to the ground. I think realistically his best chance of winning the fight is on the feet and finding the KO. So interesting game plans, interesting clash. I'm super excited to see how that pans out when the two will eventually collide in the middle of the octagon. I mean, it's inevitable. But how they deal with each other, how they deal with the ranges. Gaethje obviously wants to stay in a certain range. We've seen a lot of front kicks up the middle from Charles Oliveira, a lot of teeps, that kind of stuff, traditional kind of stuff, with a bit of a leg kick. He opened up with a leg kick, I think, against Michael Chandler that really sat him down. So the kick heavy, that kind of shooter box style is really growing. He's really growing in confidence with it, I would say, as opposed to just submissions. So it's going to be very interesting how these guys come out and deal with each other on the feet. But yeah, I expect a couple of crazy rounds, and I would expect a finish from either one of them. Obviously, I will lay out my predictions later on, the graphic and stuff. Rose Namajunas versus Carla Esparza. This is obviously the rematch. The Carla Esparza being the first women's strawweight title holder from the Ultimate Fighter. And obviously Rose has completely evolved from them, and both to a degree. I think Carla Esparza's kind of way of winning fights has stayed the same, but I mean, she's obviously evolved, but it's no secret about how she does it. She's got a very wrestling heavy base, and her wrestling is really world class. Rose has just seemed to have come on in leaps and bounds in all aspects of the game, so it's going to be very interesting. I think we again going to get sucked into the hype of Rose, but I would expect Rose to face quite a bit of adversity and have to deal with the wrestling for big parts of this fight. And I think how she deals with the wrestling, if she's able to start the takedowns, if she's able to get back up on her feet, and execute her game plan will be interesting to see how she does it and if she's able to keep it going at all times of the fight. Once Carla Esparza gets you down, it's a very, very difficult situation. It's not easy to get up. She's very tight. She doesn't give much space. And obviously on her feet, we've seen what Rose can do. The way she moves in and out is incredible to watch. Her footwork, lateral movement, head movement, her fight IQ is off the charts. So yeah, another interesting matchup. It's going to be almost to the point of a very wrestling heavy approach versus a very stand-up heavy approach, or jiu-jitsu approach if it hits the deck, I would say. But yeah, interesting matchup, and I don't think it's a very tight match. I could see this one going the distance to a decision, if I'm honest. If it's an early stoppage, you would say it would be in favor of Rose. That's my opinion. Chandler versus Tony Ferguson. This is a tough one. I think we can all agree that it's not the Tony Ferguson of younger years. He's obviously aged. He's got a lot of miles on the body. He's been through some stuff. Complete overhaul of his camp. He's moved. And all sorts of stuff have happened in Tony's life. He's had some crazy wars of late, especially in the back end of his career. I think he's 38 or 37, 38 now. He's not the young dog he was before. Still very dangerous, still very exciting, but I just think this kind of newer generation lightweight and someone like Michael Chandler is just going to be too much for Tony Ferguson. I think Michael Chandler will get a TKO here. That's my feeling. I mean, it obviously can. We know if it hits the deck, we know Tony Ferguson can pull off all manner of submission from anywhere. There's obviously always possibilities, but on paper, I just think that Michael Chandler is just going to be too much, too strong, too powerful, and just maybe be that little bit more hungrier. Still with the title shot in sight. So I think that'll be a little bit of extra motivation. And Michael Chandler wants to come back and get a win now. He's obviously had some crazy fights. His stock has never devalued, but he does still have L's on the record. And I would guess he would want to make that right. Shogun Hua versus Oven Sampur is a fun one at light heavyweight, two monstrous men. And then Cowboy Cerrone versus Joe Lozon. One for the old dogs. All of you old fans like my good friend Warren King, who's a massive fan of Joe Lozon. And I think that's kind of going to be Cowboy riding off to the sunset, we would hope, and perhaps both guys riding off into the sunset, who knows. Two guys have been doing it for a hot minute. But yeah, great cards, great fighting weekend. It's going to be a long one, not much sleep, but it's going to be very exciting. It's been a while since we've had back-to-back big fights, so it actually hasn't been that long, I'm lying. But yeah, exciting week. I love a good fight week. I love a double-header fight week, especially coming off a weekend like we had with the RMAF and all kinds of other stuff going on. Big shout out to the amateur athletes again. We are loving your guys' work. Hopefully this is a start of many good things. The cards, the times I will post, my picks I will post, and everything else you need will be available on my page, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So please, if you need to know what time the fights are, you don't have to ask me. You can just give it one of those good old scrollies and you'll find what needs to be there. Thanks very much for tuning in. We'll chat to you soon. Peace.